create exponential value whilst ensuring positive human impact.
The face of collaboration, of a best-in-class ecosystem brought together on EY Fabric. The face
of the future, of people augmented and empowered by AI.
This is the face of EY.ai,
helping to build a better working world.
Find out how you can have confidence
in the opportunities AI brings.
Hello. Yeah, good evening. We will be shortly starting the session, Forward Momentum, Charting the Future of Mobility. Good evening, everyone. We will shortly be starting the session on Forward Momentum, Charting the Future of Mobility. Request you all to please kindly settle down. warm welcome to all for the session, Forward Momentum, Charting the Future of Mobility. Can we play the video for the session, please? I would now like to request Mr. R. Dinesh, President CII, to kindly take the session forward, please.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So we have a very interesting panel to speak about the future of mobility. So let me set the context, which I think I briefly mentioned in the couple of comments which I made in the morning as well. So from both from industry perspective and CIS perspective, mobility is far greater than, if I can say so, EVs as a solution. So as we go down this journey of mobility, at least I see three clear verticals. One, where what I would call a shared personal mobility, that could be including transportation, people transportation, buses, people, I would call it corporate transportation as we call it, and the changes which is going to take place in that sector. The second is from goods and services mobility, and this is going to cover logistics, this is going to cover the way in which goods are shaped, move, and as we go down that journey, it's both about first mile connectivity, last mile connectivity, how are we going to build the infrastructure for making sure it's green and sustainable as we go down this path. And third is what I would call a shared mobility, and I think we just saw the announcement of, so to say, buses being brought in by Uber and the new name which I heard today. So I think these are all complete changes which are going to take place in the way in which transportation is being looked at. And as mobility as a theme comes on board, I think we have a very interesting panel to take forward the discussions in terms of different perspectives of how this sector looks like. But also I would like to add, as we go through this transition, I think we are not looking at just the manufacturing, or I would call it the user side of it. We also have to look at both the upstream and downstream, and that's the point which I mentioned in the morning. If you're really speaking about the number of jobs which are being created, the number of MSMEs which are involved, the number of livelihood businesses which are involved in this sector, we are speaking about a sweeping change in the way in which the economic imperatives of this sector change is going to lead to. Therefore, it's a very important subject for CII, for I would call it most economies in the world. And as we speak, I would say it's not just India, but many parts of the world are struggling with the right answers and the right solutions as we go forward. So maybe there's a right opportunity for us to build the best solution and see whether that can work. And finally, we will also talk about the fact that there are going to be different technologies which are going to be at play as we go down this path. So it's not like one shoe is going to fit all and make it easy for everyone to find a solution. Therefore, I hope we are not going to come up with conclusions, but we will hopefully throw up good ideas and thoughts which we'll take forward as CII shapes its policy recommendation for the mobility as a sector. So let me now start by asking Mr. Jaydev Galla to give his opening comments. The format we will have is a 5-minute opening comment from people in the panel, and then we'll have interactions. So go ahead.
Thank you, Dinesh. Good afternoon, everyone. So I've been studying the EV market now for a couple of decades, being a battery manufacturer of lead-acid batteries for the ICE vehicles in India. It was always a matter of great concern for me in terms of how the vehicle market is going to evolve globally and in India. And I would say that I've been ready for this transition in terms of mentally preparing myself for this transition and trying to wonder what that transition is going to look like. It used to give me a lot of sleepless nights, to be honest, because at some point of time, if the whole thing switches over to EV, then what happens to our industry, what happens to all the component suppliers around the country that are dependent on supplying to IC engines, overnight, how are they going to make that transition? But as I've been watching the events unfold, I think the first most important thing was the PLI scheme that was floated by the government of India. Till then, everybody was waiting to see who's going to take the first step. It was a chicken and egg situation. Are the OEs going to invest first? Are the battery manufacturers going to invest first? Are the charging centers going to come up first? Because all of these are required to make the system work. But who's going to take that step first? Nobody was really taking a major step. The PLI scheme, I think, got things going, got things rolling. Everybody started realizing that now is the time. If we don't enter now, we may miss the bus. And then we started looking at, okay, how is this transition going to look like in India? Our assessment is that it's really going to impact the light mobility segment far greater than other segments to start with. Light mobility, I mean two-wheeler, three-wheeler, small cars. I think that's really where the impact is going to be felt most, and that's where the sales are actually taking place as we speak even now. And why that's happening is because of pure economic reasons. It's not only because of government incentives. Now those vehicle categories have reached a parity in terms of EV versus ICE in terms of total cost of ownership. Now you can own a two-wheeler, which is battery operated, or a three-wheeler, or a small car. And the economics versus IC engine is almost matching now. So it's a market-driven demand, which is very good for the industry, that it's not just induced by incentives by the government, but it's a market-driven demand that's growing. It's very good and very strong demand, in my opinion. But if you look at all other segments, like Dinesh was mentioning, whether it's luxury passenger cars, high-performance passenger cars, the commercial vehicles, both in terms of both passenger as well as the goods vehicles, these have different types of demand. Intercity buses have different type of demand. So you all would have heard the term horses for courses. And I think that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at, depending on the course, whether it's a intercity, intracity, light vehicle, heavy vehicle, whatever it may be, you're going to choose the technology that best suits that. And it may be continuing to be with ICE, with hybridization is also continuing to grow. It could be natural gas, it could be battery operated. So I think we're going to see all of these things happening. And even on the battery front, it's going to be multiple technologies. I don't think it's going to be only one. If all the vehicles suddenly switch to lithium and all the backup power suddenly switch to lithium, I don't think we have enough lithium reserves in the world to cater to that demand. So even to keep commodity prices stable and affordable, you're going to have multiple technologies serving multiple requirements. This is what I see. I have more to talk about on batteries and EV specifically, which we'll get into during the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was, as you said, a good opening comment. Can I now move to Mr. Verma of Loham?
Good evening. So, whatever future of mobility we can imagine, whether it is an EV future, whether it's a hybrid future, whether it's a hydrogen future, an autonomous future, connected future, a very critical role that will be played across all these futures is that of materials. Critical materials are going to play a significant role in us moving from where we are today to the future that we all are envisaging. The government of India has deemed about 50 materials as critical. And just to quiz all of you a little bit on your periodic table, how many of you remember your periodic table? Someone, anyone, volunteer. What was the third element? Lithium, very much. Lithium was the third element. What was the eighth element? The eighth element is what we all are breathing right now, oxygen, right? So anyway, there are a bunch of these elements which are super critical. 50 elements have been deemed critical. Again, whether we think of EV with batteries, whether we think of hydrogen, whether we think of data centers which are going to store all the data if we're going to run into a connected future, whether we think of the powertrain which has magnets in it, everything has some critical material in it. Lithium is the one that we all keep talking about, but there are a whole host of other critical materials. Cobalt, nickel, the rare earth metals, the platinum group metals, they're all going to play their role. And unfortunately, as a nation, we don't have those in abundant numbers. And the true reality of the world is most of these elements sit in China, where they have built significant refining capacity. China may not hold the original element, but China holds all the refining capacity for these elements. So what do we do as a nation if we truly want to transition? As a nation, we certainly need to build certain capacities, and not the least of which is to build a circular capacity. I talk about a framework often, which I call the MCR framework, which is measure, collect, and recirculate. We need to understand what is it that we want in our industry. We need to figure out how to collect that from the general ecosystem, and then we need to figure out how to recirculate that into the ecosystem. Mr. Gala just talked about the fact that we don't have enough lithium. We don't. But the amazing truth about lithium is you can recycle it infinitely. So once you have got lithium into the ecosystem from Mother Earth, after that, once it has led its life, you can continually recycle it infinitely, and you actually can have an infinite access to that particular resource. And that is the truth that we all want to work towards, how to create a circular economy, how to recirculate our resources, and how in that process ensure that we have true automotive security, true energy security, and true sovereignty over the industry that we want to create. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajat. That was very useful, and I think not only did you test memory, but I think it'll be interesting for us to understand what it means when it comes to the recycling, which I think you spoke about. So we will come back to that later. Now, can I move to Mr. Gulati to cover from his perspective?
Yeah. Good afternoon. Well, I'll begin like this. We are the fastest growing large economy, fourth going to third. Last year, we manufactured 4.1 million cars. In a year or two from now, that will reach about 5 million. In this growth, which is bound to happen because our size, scale, demographics, two things are going to become critical, which everybody knows. One is the issue of energy security. We are hugely dependent upon fossil fuels for powering our mobility requirements. And of course, the associated problem of carbon emissions, climate change. Now, these are two paradigms that we have to grapple with. We have to, look at to resolve. I totally agree. The whole issue that we're dealing with today is not one of technology A versus technology B. The kind of scale and the size of the problem that we face and the time period we have to condense it in would require all sustainable technologies to really take off. Besides the point that there are going to be segments which are going to be more suited to a certain technology versus others. And therefore, you would have, I totally agree with the Honorable Prime Minister when he laid out a broader vision of cleaner, sustainable energy sources for mobility of the future. Now, just a little mathematics. Today, we are around 80-85% importing of fossil fuels. As per IEA growth that we are looking at, this is going to go, this just from passenger cars, the energy requirement is going to go 4x. Let's say I'm talking about cars here, it applies for other segments as well. Last year we were 2% electric, perhaps 1.8 to 2% hybrids. That's, let's say, 4% or the market sorted out, or if you would, 3% of the market sorted out. 97% of the market remains fossil fuel, and this market is growing. And these vehicles stay on the roads for 15 years. So by 2030, you're looking practically at 87 to 92% of your units in operation on the roads, which are going to be fossil fuel. And that's why the projection of 4x. Now, that's the problem statement. So therefore, the answer really is, you cannot take a solution from any other location or any other context and say that this is going to apply suo motu India. So it's not only about a good fit between technology and segments, it's also a good fit between technology and our local context, which means our existing energy mix, our infrastructure readiness, our capability of consumers to adopt green technologies vis-a-vis the traditional incumbent technologies, for them to be able to make a better choice. So I believe it's going to be a mix of all technologies. The mix is going to vary from segment to segment. Some of these technologies in the immediate future are going to be hugely impactful and are not spoken about. For example, the E20 program promises to eliminate 20% of petrol use right away in a year from now. Can you imagine any technology which can do that without any disruption, without any dependence on imports? I certainly can't. So the moot point here being, the first point which I'd like to place before this house is, we have to look at our solutions. We have to look at solutions that are really low-hanging fruits, which can have huge impact and need not unnecessarily, in a fashionable use of the term, be disruptive. We don't have to be. Second point is, right now, we're going through a phase of seamless integration of the physical, digital, and biological worlds, thanks to IoT, AI, robotics, etc. Now, this offers huge opportunities, not only for society, governance, but also for all sectors of economy, including manufacturing, including automotive. AI in automotive is around $25 billion worth today. That's going to increase 3x to 75 by 2030. But I believe this is just scratching the surface, because this numbers only talks about direct application. But if you look at two areas, just two areas that I would like to talk about very briefly with the liberty of the chair, is if you were to use the power of the AI and IoT and its ability to develop digital twins, which can enable you to do a complete modeling of the transportation of a city, you are looking at a possibility of doing that modeling and building smart, efficient transport, mobility-enabled cities for the future. Just look at another application of using the same technology coupled with ITS, which is now becoming a low-hanging fruit. You can look at solution to not only better traffic management, but also much better enforcement. Similarly, on the energy space, and I'll end this with this, we're talking about batteries, and we're talking about range anxieties, and we're talking about, ethanol, I mentioned, biofuel, and there are always these debates. There's an issue of materials. With AI today, you could basically simulate the use of various materials in a speed and scale which was never possible earlier. So you could be looking at a possible formulation in a condensed time frame with a fraction of a cost, which would give you a possible solution which is probably a better solution as compared to use of rare earth metals, or having a much higher energy density, or having a much higher life cycle, and at a better cost. These things are happening. In addition, if you look at the use of genetic engineering and coupled with AI, it is work that's happening today to produce algae which could generate ethanol or biofuels using 3G technology. Now, this completely takes the whole debate about food versus fuel, etc., out of the equation. So what I'm saying is energy storage, energy source can be very transformatively changed in a very short period of time. I think this is where we need to be also putting our buck in terms of investing as a country so that we can really be ahead of the curve rather than chasing the issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikram. I think you raised a few other interesting points for us to come back to during the course. So now can I request Venu from Hitachi Energy to give his...
Yeah, thank you, Dinesh. Good evening, everybody. And let me bring a different perspective, not from the vehicle standpoint, but the rest of the infrastructure standpoint. So we are from Hitachi Energy. I run the company Hitachi Energy. So our portfolio, be it a product, system, services, and software, is the bridge between the generation and the consumption. So we play around in the whole ecosystem, whether it is to bringing the energy from any source to load center, or transporting the power from thousands of kilometers. So that's where our technology will come in. And when it comes to the electrification, we enable the power system to electrify everything and anything. In the future decarbonized world, we see the two things on the power system. One is that you are able to transport any source of a power generated any corner of the country to the load center. And the second one is the system should be capable of electrifying everything and anything. So that's where we are coming from that. So the charging infrastructure is extremely important. And when you're talking about the penetration, people always have what is in your mind, range anxiety, so on and so forth, always will be there. How do we ensure that we penetrate this electrical vehicle, which is extremely important to decarbonizing the whole ecosystems in that. So our view, especially in the charging system, we believe that the charging infrastructure, whatever we create, it should be interoperable. We cannot have a standalone design, standalone things. Technology can be different. But on the front play, suppose you bring a car to a particular charging station, you should be in a position to plug and charge whatever the time you want to set in that. So that's where the interoperability come into. The technologies are available to ensure that you bring this interoperability. Second thing is the charging infrastructure to be scalable and it's a modular. The more and more you have bring in the modular, and that's where the penetration will come into that. And the next one is also extremely important is also that these are all very reliable, and you take a car to particular charging infra, and if it is not reliable, and the reliability in our industry we call about 99.999%. Okay, you bring it to the electrical charging point, it has to be close to 100%. There cannot be anything. So that's where the reliability come in that. And the next point, which is also very important for a country like us, is the affordability. How do we bring this charging infrastructure at a price point that is affordable to the whole of things in that? And on top of all that is very, very important, this charging infrastructure will not be, charge the electrical vehicle if it is not powered through a fossil-free energy in that. So these are all the 5 encompassing rules, in my view, is going to be a very big play going forward to define the charging thing. Technologies can be anything. We always call the energy transition is so huge. The challenge is so huge. It is bigger than one company, one individual, even if I say one nation. We need a lot of collaboration, co-creation, working together, bringing the technology at a scale and speed that is affordable to a country like us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think obviously there are going to be many, many questions to follow through, because if you make it fully interoperable, the question for the manufacturer would be what is that differentiation? Yeah, sure. And the second question would be where is the power going to come from? Right. So as you go down this path, that's where this, what I would call discussion, because it tends to become quite, I would call it contentious and interestingly contentious. But I think we are now going to move. Yes, exactly. So to make it more, anyway, we don't want. Yeah. But I'm now going to move to a completely different aspect of this sector, which is the component industry. And Sanjay, I think not only from how do you see the transition, but also how important is this from the sector? Because obviously it's a high job provider, and it has a certain, I would call it, potential loss of jobs, loss of capacity, if we move completely into a a sustainable model for without the ICE, but if it's a different solution.
Okay.
So it'll be good to hear from.
So great question, and Dinesh, from the component industry, we're really doing all the heavy lifting. Clearly because of the fact that there are major disruptions in the industry. It's almost like we're at that stage where we went from horses to vehicles. And I think Henry Ford said, if I ask my customers what they want, they'd say, I want faster horses. So it's a very interesting point in our lives in the component industry because there are multiple technologies that are being talked about. I wish we'd come up with one technology and we could just sort of work on that. However, with the multiplicity of availability of technology, whether it be hybrid, hydrogen, electric, biofuels, etc., we have a big role to play in terms of providing the right solutions. So I think there are three very big sort of three parties that need to come together in terms of policy making, because regulation is driving a lot of change, customer requirements and customer demands, which is driving change, and then industry, which has to productionize everything that's been talked about. When we look at the vehicle today or the industry today and the disruption in the industry, I think one of the biggest choke points in India is the R&D spend. In our industry, the R&D spend is 0.5% of revenue, which is very far from the industry average of about 5 to 6%, between 4 to 6%. So I think the R&D spend has to increase. You talk about the fact that there will be job losses. I think there'll be many more jobs because with these challenges, the number of opportunities that come around are phenomenal. If you look at infrastructure, you look at charging infrastructure, if you look at telematics, if you look at connectivity. So if you look at the engine and you just sort of rule of thumb say 30% of the vehicle is gone, 40% of the vehicle is going to convert to software. So what are we doing in terms of developing businesses and in that space, and how does our competitive landscape change? So if you look at the automotive industry, today Microsoft and Google is competing with Bosch and ZF. And you never imagined that you'd have Microsoft and Google in the automotive industry. But again, the automotive industry has also changed to what we call the mobility industry. So we're no longer an automotive industry per se, but more of a mobility industry. The other opportunities that are going to become extremely big are data analytics, data collection, because the amount of data that's being thrown up and being collected in the automotive industry is phenomenal. But what do we do with that data? That's another huge challenge which enough companies companies don't know about. You've got maintenance which can be done remotely. So again, opportunities in that. Cybersecurity will play a very big role, and I don't think we've talked about that, but the more connected we go and the more electric we go, the more of a bigger role that we'll play. And then, you've got the entire space that is now emerging of the electric vertical landing and takeoff, the eVTOL space, which is again becoming a big part of mobility. You talked about the Uber buses. There's going to be Uber, flights between for short destinations, last mile connectivity from a logistics point of view. So how is that going to change? So I think there's so much disruption in the industry, and with this disruption, and Vikram talked about AI, and everything that's going on will create jobs. I think the job opportunity, I think the opportunities in terms of new business models will be created. However, the key is going to be investment in R&D. And I can talk more about that when we talk about our individual companies in what we're doing.
Thank you, Sanjay. I think now we move to the last element of the, I would call it, in a way, interesting thought process of whether it is technology or mobility. I think mobility as a solution, which I think is what you're looking at, Nishant. So happy to hear your thoughts.
No, I think it's a very opportune time when India as a country is looking at zero emission technologies, and in zero emission technologies today EV is one of the most promising ones, and we look at electric buses where we have a very high level of asset utilization, and it's being meant for the common man. Almost 90% of India uses uses a bus at least once a day. So the idea is clearly that when you are having such a solution, how that is being used by the masses. Secondly, how that is ensuring that you are enhancing your energy security, how you are able to get a better service, and how the customer satisfaction is converted into delight. So you're transitioning from a need to a choice which is being made by the user at the end of it. And that's what our purpose is all about. Whether it's city buses, intercity buses, or you see any kind of solutions, because today, even if you look at the government programs, whether you looked at FAME or you looked at different PLI solutions, in FAME, more than 40% was contributing towards electric buses because it's meant for the masses. And my personal belief is that today, two-wheeler, three-wheeler, part of commercial vehicles and buses would be the first ones to convert because the asset utilization is the highest there and it is being used by multiple people. At the same time, we are also able to understand that the charging infra complexities go down substantially when you're charging in fleets and when you're charging in depots or you're charging in fleet locations, and the asset utilization of the charging infrastructure goes up as well. And clearly, what is important today is the majority of the people look at electric vehicles as standalone. Whereas when you have batteries and you're using the batteries in the first life in electric vehicles, if you're designing the batteries initially, keeping in mind that there's a second and third life as well, and you're able to repurpose the batteries to use them for energy storage and then use them as a power backup, eventually the life cycle goes up to 15 to 20 years. And that changes the ball game completely because the companies can have multiple life cycle opportunities and business opportunities around them. And that's where I think what Vikram was mentioning, role of AI becomes very important. And lately what we have seen is that whether with digital twins, with AI, IoT, you are able to generate more than 1 million data points per vehicle per day. So that is the kind of data bandwidth available, but with that, what kind of data analytics can be done is very essential. And what I have tried to see is that how that is being linked to the approach of complete localization and GVC in the longer terms. That global value chains are very important, and unless and until we have scale, we wouldn't be competitive. As a country, we have a very big benefit of having a domestic consumption, so which gives us scale initially and gives the inertia for us. But unless and until, and this opportunity is not going to stay forever, where we are having this transition and the global emission norms are at more or less at par in terms of standards which are there. And I think if we are investing in technology, so not only make in India, but design in India, create in India, and cater to the global market and making global products, I think that is something which is waiting to be harnessed. And companies in the Indian EV ecosystem as well as the whole manufacturing ecosystem can really utilize that to grow beyond a certain point and really see that how India is becoming the manufacturing hub across the world, in addition to China plus one, what all of us have been talking about in times to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Nishant. So now I think we are going to get to the panel and ask the interaction, so to say. So maybe I will start with you, Jaydev, in trying to look at from access to technology, and if I can use that mass availability of the same, how do you see that going forward? And we heard today morning almost all the speakers speak about making available technologies in India, for India, and usage in India. So in that background, it would be good to hear from you. What do you think? I know we had the private conversation separately, but it will be good to hear what you think.
Sure. So I think if India has to become self-sufficient or independent of geopolitical foes in this area, first of all, we need to figure out, where are we dependent, right? Today, we're not only dependent for the technology, but we're dependent even for the manufacturing process, the manufacturing equipment, the raw materials, and the know-how. So, I just got done visiting China last week, and I visited a few gigafactories. And what I realized is that, the product design is not that challenging. There's a lot of companies around the world that can design the product, including us, in my opinion. The manufacturing equipment can be bought by suppliers through the common suppliers that other people are using. But the know-how in terms of how to run those machines efficiently and effectively you can run through a few $1 billion before you get it right, if you're not careful, in about 6 to 12 months. So that initial phase, I know we had the discussion in the main summit, and we heard from the minister as well as the secretary in another session. But I think one thing that they need to get and understand is that, of course, we can do it, but it's a question of time and money. And how much time do we have, how much money do we have before we catch up to the rest of the world? If we need to accelerate our pace and become competitive globally, we have to utilize China, not be dependent on them, but we have to utilize whatever we can. We need to exploit the resources and the capabilities that they have. Today, it's very easy to get into a technology partnership with Chinese companies because they know that investments will not be approved, right? That's a good policy that the government has taken. It's forced Chinese companies to look at supplying technology as opposed to controlling the technology. So there are policy initiatives that can support us, like that policy initiative, but they have to recognize that we can't just suddenly, de-link from China and get on with it. There's no Indian suppliers for equipment. Even equipment, the plants being set up, 50 gigawatt hour, 100 gigawatt hour plants being set up in Europe and US are using Chinese equipment and Chinese technicians to make sure that they're working properly so that you're not wasting time and money. That is one thing. Second thing is the sustainable supply chain and the scale at which we're manufacturing. Now, the government has to support us till we become globally competitive. And to become globally competitive, we need to have a global scale. And to have a global scale, we need to have some level of hand-holding or protection in the Indian industry. As the domestic demand grows, we will get that scale, and then we'll be competitive, and then we can go and compete around the world and compete with anybody else that comes to India. So I think that level of support by the government to take care of the industry in its nascent stage while it's becoming globally competitive is extremely important.
Thanks. And I think we will come back, if we have the time, to one more question on that. But Vikram, I'm now going to move to you. I know that there has been this debate in terms of, which is the best technology, so to say. And I don't think there's a one-shoe-fits-all answer for sure. But having said that, and going back to the point which we speak about of energy insufficiency and how are we really going to get energy out of renewable energy resources to make up for that. And I think the Honorable Prime Minister mentioned in the Mobility Expo, saying that the rooftop solar was one way of getting there for the charging infrastructure at the rural level. But having said that, they are all tip of the iceberg, so to say, to get there. So what is, in your mind, the right solution for India to develop, quote-unquote, a sustainable mobility model?
Well, first of all, I think we must all recognize technology is just an enabler. It's not the end in itself. It's a means to the end. And the end, we all know, is very simple. Energy self-reliance and clean energy. That's the end. That's the goal that we're trying to achieve. So how do you get there? Is there any one silver bullet that's going to solve the problem for us? No, definitely not. It's not the case anywhere in the world. Why I say that is just look at the markets. It's about not just having the technology. It's not just about policies. It's not just about providing the infrastructure. It's about the end user as well. As a consumer, no two consumers have the same needs. So even in evolved markets, let's look at China. Last year's penetration numbers was 21% BEVs, 10% PHEVs, 5% strong hybrids. And they have a very robust biofuel program as well to complement this. But what's interesting is the pace of growth of these three technologies, if my memory serves me right, was the biggest growth in China year on year was by PHEVs, not by BEVs. And that sounds a bit strange for a market that's so regulated, so driven by policy, so ready. There's nobody else who could be as ready as them. So I think this just outlines the point I'm trying to make. And if you look at any market, you look at Europe, the numbers are something similar. Trends would be somewhere in the same order, giving you a same narrative. So, for example, in Europe, it's an equal toss-up between strong hybrids and EVs. US is seeing something of a pushback, which is temporary, completely temporary. And to make the matters even more complex, you have geopolitics, jumping in, creating a total different narrative. So, coming back to the solution, what's the answer for India? There is no one answer for India. You could have electric very well suited to two-wheelers, three-wheelers, small cars that do small rounds, buses definitely. You could also look at battery swap models for two-wheelers and three-wheelers for optimization and better asset utilization and better returns for the consumer. You could also, if you look at the passenger vehicle market, you would need a host of these technologies. And like I said, and I'll repeat this, and this is very important, in 1 year from now, 20% of gasoline would be sorted out without any of us realizing what's happened. That's approximately 50,000 crore rupees of fossil fuel import gone. And as we all know, ethanol is a renewable fuel. It's a green fuel. It's a carbon neutral fuel. It's a fuel that comes from the farm. It's a fuel that fuels the agrarian economy. I'm not a champion here for ethanol, I'd like to clarify that. But the sole point I'm trying to make is, jitni electric relevant hai, utni many other technologies hai. And this technology mix is going to be never one. It's going to evolve. Because technology will continue to evolve. Tomorrow, if you have a disruption in battery, which makes cost even, today it's $50, somebody was saying, even much more less with longer life, with no charging issues, there you have it. That technology will be going much ahead. So, to sum up, we need, I think, multiple technologies for different segments, multiple technologies which are suited for India, Indian local context, are suited and well matched to our requirements of our energy mix, as well as our infrastructure readiness and consumer acceptance. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are nowhere near an answer anyway, and I don't think, as I said, we are going to give the answer sitting here today. So I'm actually going to move to Rajat and ask him, is your business model built on the hope that we are actually going to get into EVs in a big way, or are you really looking at this in a more holistic manner?
No, we certainly are not looking at this as a pure EV growth opportunity. Like I said, we think of ourselves as a critical materials company. Whether it is hydrogen, whether it is plug-in hybrid, as Vikram mentioned, which has taken off in China at much greater growth rates, whether it is autonomous connected vehicles, which require a very large data center and data backup. I think broadly the way we think about this business is, there is a lot of opportunities for materials, right? Everyone here is talking about bits or data. We like to think about atoms. We like to think about materials. Materials have a very strong role to play. And whatever future you imagine, there is going to be some material that needs to be brought into the ecosystem. And how do you bring that material into the ecosystem? How do you build capacity around that material? How do you build capacity around the entire material value chain? We talk about EVs, but we talk about cell manufacturing capacity, but we forget that before cell manufacturing capacity, you've got to have a material beneficiation capacity. You need to have a material refining capacity. You need to have a material precursor capacity, and then you have to have the material capacity. There are 4 other industries, 4 other companies involved before you can actually make a cell. Forget the EV, forget the battery. Who builds that ecosystem? Right? And the same thing is true across every other thing that we can imagine. We talk about hydrogen. Who builds the materials for an electrolyzer? We talk about data centers. Who builds the ecosystem around electronics? Who builds the ecosystem around germanium, gallium, which are fundamental to semiconductors of tomorrow? So there is a lot of play in materials that we need to recognize. The good news is, India historically has a very strong sort of play when it comes to chemicals, when it comes to metals. We've developed a very large talent pool in this country. Right? Whether it is around, our play in fertilizers, our play in pharmaceuticals, our play in copper and aluminum, we've got that talent pool. how do we nurture that talent pool to play a significant role in the critical material ecosystem? Comes back to a couple of things, based on what Sanjay mentioned. We need to invest in R&D. We need to invest in that R&D. We need to ensure that our talent pool is getting the relevant direction to produce the materials that we are talking about. But once you do that, there is no reason why we can't be competitive with China. We've already demonstrated in our company that we can produce lithium, cobalt, and nickel at price points which are very similar to those of that of China. There is absolutely no reason to believe why the Chinese need to be ahead of us. And we have actually done all the equipments within India. We've not got equipments from outside of India. So we have the capacity to build the equipments. We have the capacity to do R&D. We have the capacity to be competitive with the Chinese. And we need to have that belief in us.
Thank you. That's interesting. Moving to you, Venu, I think the question is, how do you look at the planning of this infrastructure? I mean, whether we like it or not, or whether whichever technologies come in, you're still going to have 20-30%. And of course, you can use AI, you can use modeling tools to build it. Yeah. But I think if you assume for a minute there is going to be last mile, first mile connectivity, there is going to be two-wheelers, there are going to be personal mobility vehicles which are going to take up, let us say, 15-20% of the market. How do you really look at this as going forward from a planning of the city, planning of the grid? How do you look at it?
Absolutely. I think a very, very interesting question, Dinesh. See, from our perspective, we take, for example, India as a country, we already done in penetrating the mobile telephones, right? Just imagine 1990s, how our mobile telephone used to be, right? And from there, we had different technologies around the world, and then many of the countries are far ahead of us. But we took a really leapfrog to a different technology, and the mobile technology has made us, completely paradigm shift, how technology can you ramp it up at affordability in that. I take the same thing, even though I'm a bit more optimistic that, I see the same thing is going to happen in the electrical vehicle in that. Here it is not about, we definitely need to decarbonize. Again, give a data points, 70% of the CO2 in this country is in the energy sector. In that, 15% contribute for the transport sector. And that's a big chunk. If government wants to really reach, intermediate ambitious milestone, the 2030, they want to reduce 1 billion tons of CO2, the transportation sector also plays a major role. So how do we plan that? We need to plan, for example, you all know that what happened in the Europe, every phone has a different charging equipment, charger, C-type, USB type. They said, guys, no. At this year, everybody has to follow the C-type, including Apple. They brought in iPhone 15, they made C-type charging. We need those kind of standards. We are not looking at differentiate. Every product needs to be differentiated. But when you're looking at the customer face, because if you have a vehicle, you take the vehicle can be different depending upon the different design, different model, can have a features, etc. But what needs to be from the customer standpoint has to be agnostic of those things. That will penetrate even more. So that's number one. Number two is that how do we plan on the grid standpoint? If it is only single vehicle, there's no issue. You can always go and charge it in your house, in your office, it will work. Look at our Delhi airport. Look at our Delhi railway station, our Bangalore airport. Thousands of cars come there. Hundreds of buses come over there. Every time you start, you don't control the timing of that, right? Every time, what happens, the thousands of cars and hundreds of buses plug it to the grid will go blackout. So how we built in the stability of the grid? So you are able to robustness, we need to bring it. That has to come in that. So that's what we say. Every component going into the grid in electrifying this has to be future proof. The good part is that there are technologies are available in that. So what we need is, the need of the hour is we need to actually ramp it up in that.
Thank you. So I'm now going to move to you, Sanjay. I know as a company you have kind of transformed yourself into becoming quote unquote new technology friendly, right? So can you tell us how you see that happening, not just how it has happened in your case, and how do you see that happening going forward?
So I'll go back to my point, on R&D. We spend between 3.5% to 6% of revenue on R&D on any given year. And the reason we do that is because we want to become globally competitive and we want to supply to the world. I have a very different view being in the auto component industry, and we started our lives with joint ventures, and I'm grateful for the technology that joint ventures brought to us, but I think joint ventures are restrictive. Whilst if you look at the automotive industry, whilst we're the third largest in the world, by value we're only 2%, which doesn't make sense from an investment perspective to invest in new technologies if you're only going to be able to restrict it to supply into a small value market. And therefore, when we looked at our business, we looked at what we could do from a global perspective. Today we control close to 10% of the global market for differential gears. From an India perspective, it's much larger than what India. I have a capacity to build 13 to 14 million vehicles, to supply into 13 to 14 million vehicles. So I feel that what we did was made some big bets in technology. We also looked at autonomous, even though today autonomous is level 5 is a little far away, especially in the Indian context. But we have a business that can detect a baby's heart rate and breathing rate through a sensor. And that's a level 5 safety standard in Europe. So if you want to achieve level 5 safety standard, you should be able to tell if there's a child in a locked vehicle, stationary, and it should alert the driver. So I think investment in technology is key. Whilst we've looked at joint ventures, whilst we started our life that way, and I said that absorbing that technology is very important. And I think the real challenge for us in the automotive industry, which again, moving to now mobility industry, is what do we do with the MSME? What do we do with the tier 2 and the tier 3 supply chain? How do we bring technology across the board? Whilst the PLI schemes are very encouraging for the larger companies because they encourage you to invest in future technologies, I feel that the technology absorption has to happen across the chain, across the supply chain, and I think there needs to be more investment from private sector, and that's the only way that we're going to have to, again, I come back to so many opportunities, and you just take sensors, and we talked about smart cities. The number of traffic lights that need to become smart is phenomenal. It's a $90 billion market, traffic lights across the world, and only 1% of that is smart. So I think the opportunities are huge. The investment in technology has to happen, and I think we need to look at the world as a market for us as a component industry. Because again, when you put capital expenditure for electric vehicles, the volume in India is minuscule compared to what it is in the West and the Far East. So I think that's the way we need to look at our industry, and that's the way we need to look at our businesses in terms of what's happening around the world, what the trends are, where the technology is going, and what investments we need to make.
Interesting. That's a good comment to take away. Finally, Nishant, if you look at mobility as a theme, and we already spoke about buses and EVs, but as we evolve, what are the challenges you see in scaling up this business? And two, from the government point of view, because public transportation is partially government, how do you see that evolving? Do you see more of the Uber's buses coming on board, or do you see the government continuously increasing their fleet, and how do you see the future?
Sure. So today, just to give you a perspective, India as a country has about 1.6 to 1.7 million buses, and majority of it is privately owned. And the government owns only a small part of it, which is partially on the city and partially on the intercity routes. The rest is being done for schools, airports, staff applications, intercity, and different city operators. So mobility business and electric buses are all about TCO, total cost of ownership. And rather than just the upfront pricing, the life cycle cost and life cycle performance is what's most important. And there are a lot of disruptions happening, which are where they're saying that a lot of holes are getting plugged, because today when we are looking at electric vehicles, so we see, and especially electric buses, from 2,000 moving parts we move to 20 moving parts, so complexity gets reduced multifold. There are a lot of spare parts had to be kept in stores and other locations, that gets addressed. There used to be a lot of pilferage issues which used to happen for fuel. That is not an issue anymore. And the kind of requirements which drivers had for fatigue issues, the kind of NVH issues and concerns which different passengers used to have get addressed in this case. And people are willing to really contribute and pay for such kind of service and transition in many cases from personal mobility to electric buses as a choice and compared to metro, because the last mile is not there in that case. So I think the big transition is happening, and recent survey also showed that how electric bus segment, the about 5% of adoption has happened, and it will grow at a very fast pace. And India is the second largest market in the world, and therefore has a very good potential to become a global leader, because in this space the routes are definitive, as well as in intercity also. Recently we saw last year 1,000-kilometer range products going to the market. So charging issues become redundant beyond a point if such kind of battery solution, such kind of integration can be brought in, where with software, hardware, firmware, you are able to enhance the vehicle life. And that's why we also personally believe a lot. We invest between 3 to 5% of our turnover into R&D on a constant basis. So understanding real-time and requirements of the end customers, not focusing only on standard products, but all about customization and using the right kind of and designing right kind of battery packs is what is important. And seeing that how the power electronics which are there and the integration at times becomes a big challenge. You have a great charger, you have an amazing battery, you have a fantastic vehicle, but the battery can't go for 1C, 2C, 3C kind of a charging rate, because in many cases people believe if you charge at a high rate, then the battery starts getting degraded, which is not the case, because every chemistry has its own thresholds. So based on the thresholds, you can design and engineer those chemistries. And that is something which can be controlled through software. So I think it's a whole methodology and approach. So personally speaking, I always feel that it's a customized solution for every city, every application which has to be brought in. There's no cookie cutter model in this case. And that is why electric buses and electric vehicles are enhancing the adoption on a TCO basis, especially in such segments.
Thank you. So I think we are almost closed. So if anyone wants to make a 1-minute comment, happy to hear. I'm asking anyone else if they want. Okay, good. Thank you. I think it is obviously, as I said, it is not a meeting where we are going to come back with a set of answers which we are going to implement. But I think we have raised enough thought-provoking issues for us to take away. As I committed today, I think CII has the agenda to come up with a so-called recommendation, a recommendatory note on how we are going to be looking at mobility, cutting across all of the 3 verticals which I spoke about. So we will be leaning on those who are here today and also others to come up with those recommendations going forward. So we will be getting back on that. And for all of you who are hearing this discussion, as I said, we have not reached anything conclusive, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you.
So, thank you, speakers, for an enriching discussion. May I now request Mr. R. Dinesh to hand over the token of appreciation to the panelists, please. Mr. Jaydev Galla. Mr. Rajat Verma. Mr. N. Venu. Mr. Sanjay Kapoor. Mr. Nishant Arya. And Mr. Vikram Gulati. With this, we come to close of this session. Thank you once again for participating.